Hello, my name is Christina Swanson, and this is my service learning project at the Domestic Violence Center of Chester County. From here out, I'll refer to it as DVCCC. So, DVCCC assists the survivors of domestic violence. Some of their services include legal counseling, housing assistance, emergency shelter, and their emergency hotline. I chose this agency because I have a personal connection to it. When I was a child, my mother and I were both sheltered in their emergency shelter for a bit of time. The mission of the Domestic Violence Center of Chester County is to provide intervention, education, outreach, advocacy, and programs to prevent, reduce, and remedy domestic violence in Chester County. Since their initiation as part of the YWCA, they have served 40,000 survivors to date and average about 3,000 survivors and their children every year. The population that DVCCC services are typically women and children who have survived domestic violence, and statistically, we do take care of the men that face these issues as well. Predominant needs and problems faced by this population are shelter or displacement. This is where the housing assistance and the emergency shelter come into play. The basic necessities. A lot of times these women and children come to the shelter with absolutely nothing except the clothes on their backs and whatever they could carry, as well as financial and legal assistance. Again, they come to the shelter with whatever they can carry, whatever they have on their backs, and oftentimes they need some legal assistance as well with things such as a PFA or a protection from abuse order, as well as getting themselves on their feet. So the role of the healthcare professional, in this case specifically the nurse, to help this population is to assess the needs of the population. And as discussed on the previous slide, those were just a few of the needs of this population. Another one of our roles is to advocate for the legal policies that assist these women and children. Advocating for women's rights, advocating for anti-abuse policies, as well as providing resources. So those of us that work in a hospital don't always see the women and children that can come in. However, if you suspect something, having the resources and knowing what is available to these women is very important, especially because it is a safety issue. So designing this project, I chose DVCCC because I have a former connection with it, being a client of theirs myself and my mother. I was also a volunteer there back in high school. So I contacted the volunteer coordinator. We discussed some of the needs of the agency. She was really glad to hear from me again. And we decided on a project that I had felt a personal connection to. So when my mother and I first went into this emergency shelter, this was probably 15, 20 years ago at this point, we were kind of just thrown whatever necessities that they had for us. We didn't get to pick anything out or anything like that. So I chose organizing the clothing donation room because giving the women a choice of something as simple as clothing means a world of difference to them when they first come to us. So as you can see in this picture, this was the very beginning of the project. As you can see, I had my work cut out for me. During the project, I basically went through every single item of clothing. I'm not done yet. I plan on going back to finish as soon as the the coronavirus quarantine ends. But as you can see, I had my work cut out for me. I went through every piece of clothing that I could, pulled out anything that was stained or ripped, and tried to organize as much as I could by size. That way it would at least look visually appealing and welcoming for the clients that would come in. This is the progress that I made. The first picture on your left shows the progress after the first day. This was just picking stuff up off the floor, even if it was just putting it in an extra bin, trying to get rid of as much of the cardboard as I possibly could, just because this donation room happens to be in the basement of the building. And I think it was quite a success for first day. The second picture and the third picture are both by the end of my project, hours before the coronavirus hit and didn't allow me to go back to finish. I organized the baby clothes and the toddler's clothes. And we realized throughout this project that we had mountains and mountains, quite literally if you remember the first picture, of children's clothing, and not quite as much women's clothing as you would think, being a women's shelter. So this allowed us to update the website and our forms and kind of get the word out there of what we really did need. I'm honestly really excited to go back and finish this. So the student objectives that I had were by the end of the project, the student will identify 3 resources available to the survivors of domestic violence. Those services and resources include the hotline that the DVCCC has in case there's an emergency, they can't leave the house, that they need to talk to somebody, they need guidance. This is what the hotline is for. The second thing is our emergency shelter. If, the women have come to the point where they cannot stay safely anymore, they have someplace to go. And then we have legal resources. Our website has a ton of information, a ton of references and resources as well. The second objective is the student will participate in 3 different areas with DVCCC. So this clothing project kind of consumed everything time-wise that I had. However, in organizing and going through all of this clothing, the counselors would stop in and tell me how their day-to-day activities would go. The lawyers would come in and talk to me about their services as well. So while I didn't participate per se in all 3 areas, I did learn quite a bit in the different areas. And the third objective I had was the student will identify 4 socioeconomic problems faced by the survivors and their children. The first socioeconomic problem that I discovered and know about from personal experience is the displacement and lack of shelter. This is one of the basic necessities that we learn about in nursing school. The second is a loss of income. A lot of times these women are not permitted to work by their abusive partner, or they have to relocate in general, so they're not able to get to work. The third socioeconomic issue is for the children. These children, because they have been displaced, they're losing their friends, they're losing basically their whole life. It gets turned upside down. Having been a child in a situation like this, I can totally relate. It's one of the hardest things to face as a child because you don't understand really what's going on. And the fourth socioeconomic problem is, again, with a financial aspect. Getting back on your feet is one of the hardest things we see with our clients. So the impact my project had on the population, even just the bit that I did, it's definitely going to require more than 30 hours um, of work to get that closet to where it needs to be. But in general, I had got a ton of praise from the employees at the shelter, just especially the counselors, saying that it definitely felt more welcoming. They definitely didn't feel so embarrassed, was the word that they used, bringing clients in so that they could pick out their own clothing for them and their children. One of the first things that I remember, again, just kind of being tossed clothes when my mother and I went into the shelter, was a sense of no control whatsoever. And that is terrifying. They've already lost so much control over how much of their time they spent with their abuser. So having even the smallest bit of control over something as simple as clothing is a huge empowerment move for these people. So the personal impact my project had on me was I was able to give back to an agency that helped my family, um, helped my mother and I get out of a very, very bad situation, and helped us get back on our feet. Sorry, I'm a little emotional talking about this. I was able to gain this sense of pride in the project, just in the little bit that I was able to accomplish. And I regained a lot of relationships with the volunteer coordinators. As I said, I was a volunteer there in high school. It was wonderful to reconnect, um, and just, it was an amazing experience overall. So the professional impact of the project, I definitely learned updated and more resources that are available to survivors. Things have definitely changed since I was in high school, and even especially since I was a child. And I also have this increased awareness of what is necessary to run one of these shelters, these businesses that help the survivors. Thank you very much for tuning in to this somewhat emotional presentation. If you would like to know more, I am all for sharing my story. Um, my mother's given me permission to share hers as well.